I never thought I'd become known as the towing terror of Millbrook Street. But when 100 angry HOA residents showed up at my store with picket signs after I had their cars impounded, I knew I'd struck a nerve. Funny how people cry about injustice when they're forced to face consequences for their actions. But here's the thing about running a business. There are two types of entrepreneurs in this world: those who earn their success and those who try to steal it from others. I've always been the first kind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When I first opened Mountain Ridge Marketplace in downtown Millbrook, people said I was crazy. A premium grocery store in this economy? You'll be bankrupt in 6 months, they warned. But I knew something they didn't. Success isn't just about what you sell, it's about the community you build. I'd spent 15 years in corporate retail management, watching big chains squeeze the life out of small businesses, treating both employees and customers like numbers on a spreadsheet. I promised myself my store would be different. I invested in prime real estate, a corner lot with ample parking. 48 spaces, each one representing a potential customer, a family coming to shop at my store. The property wasn't cheap, but location matters in retail. You can't build a community hub if people can't reach you. I took out loans, leveraged everything I had because I believed in my vision. And slowly, steadily, it worked. For 5 years, Mountain Ridge Marketplace became exactly what I'd dreamed of. We stocked local products, hired from the neighborhood, and created a shopping experience that made people feel like family. Our parking lot wasn't just asphalt and paint. It was the welcome mat to our community. Every morning, I'd arrive. Before dawn, inspect every corner of my property. Make sure everything was perfect for our customers. Some might call it obsessive, but attention to detail is what separates success from failure in this business. Then everything changed. The Westbrook Plaza HOA decided they owned more than just the residential complex across the street. They thought they owned my private parking lot too. What started as a few entitled residents leaving their cars overnight turned into a full-blown invasion. My customers couldn't find parking, my business was suffering, and the HOA board had the audacity to tell me I needed to share my private property with their residents. They didn't expect me to fight back. They thought I'd roll over, let them, take what I'd built, what I'd paid for. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated how far a self-made businessman will go to protect what's rightfully his. By the time I was done, 100 cars would be towed from my lot, the HOA board would be exposed for their corruption, and the entire Westbrook Plaza community would learn a valuable lesson about respecting private property. This isn't just a story about a parking lot dispute. It's about standing up to entitled people who think they can take whatever they want without consequences. It's about protecting what you've built. Not just for yourself, but for your employees, your customers, and everyone who believes in doing things the right way. Sometimes you have to be willing to be the bad guy in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. What happened in those 3 months changed everything, not just for my business, but for the entire neighborhood. And it all started with a single sign I posted in my parking lot. Private property. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. They should have taken that sign seriously. They really should have. You don't become a successful business owner overnight. I learned that lesson the hard way, climbing the corporate ladder for 15 years at Megamart, one of those giant retail chains where profit margins matter more than people. Started as a shopping cart collector in my early 20s, rain or shine, pushing long lines of carts across endless parking lots. That's where I first learned the importance of parking spaces. They're not just empty rectangles of asphalt, they're the gateway to your business. I worked my way up through every department, stocking shelves overnight, managing inventory, handling customer service, until I finally made it to store manager. The corporate bigwigs loved me because I could squeeze every penny of profit out of a store. But something always felt wrong about how we did business. We'd push out local vendors because their prices weren't competitive enough, replace long-time employees with part-timers to avoid paying benefits, and treat our parking lots like war zones during holiday seasons. The breaking point came during Black Friday 2019. Corporate had decided to open at midnight, and they'd oversold their doorbusters by about 300%. By 11 p.m., our parking lot was absolute chaos. Cars were double-parked, blocking fire lanes, even trying to create makeshift spaces on the sidewalks. I had to call in extra security just to prevent fights over parking spots. Inside, it wasn't much better. People fighting over TVs, trampling each other for video game consoles, all while my understaffed team tried desperately to maintain order. That night, I watched an elderly woman get knocked down in the electronics department. She wasn't even shopping for deals. She just needed to pick up her prescription from our pharmacy, which corporate insisted had to stay open. As I helped her up, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "This isn't what shopping should be like." Those words stuck with me. They still do. The next morning, after working a 16-hour shift, I sat in my office looking at the security footage. Our parking lot looked like a battlefield, littered with abandoned shopping carts, discarded coffee cups, and scattered advertisements. The sight of it made my stomach turn. This wasn't retail, it was chaos masquerading as commerce. Right then and there, I started drafting my resignation letter, but I didn't just want to quit. I wanted to prove there was a better way to run a business. I'd spent years studying retail management, earned my MBA through night classes while working full-time, and had built a reputation as someone who could turn struggling stores around. The corporate experience taught me everything about what not to do, and I was ready to do things differently. I spent the next year planning, researching locations, and meeting with local vendors. My savings account drained as I invested in market research, property surveys, and business plans. Some nights I'd drive around different neighborhoods, counting cars in parking lots, timing traffic patterns, and studying shopping behaviors. My wife thought I was crazy, but she supported me anyway. "You've got that look in your eye," she'd say, "the one you get when you know something others don't." The hardest part wasn't finding the location or securing the loans. It was convincing people to believe in my vision. Banks looked at my business plan skeptically. Another grocery store in this economy? They couldn't understand that I wasn't just opening a store, I was creating a community hub. Every rejection just made me more determined. I refinanced my house, sold my car, and cashed in my 401k. When you believe in something strongly enough, you'll risk everything to make it happen. Finally, after dozens of meetings and countless revisions to my business plan, Mountain Valley Bank took a chance on me. The loan officer, Mr. Richardson, had actually been a regular customer at my old Megamart store. He remembered how I'd transformed it from one of the worst-performing stores in the district to one of the best. "You did it for them," he said, stamping my loan application. "Now show us what you can do for yourself." Those words carried me through the months of construction, permit applications, and sleepless nights. Every decision mattered, from the layout of the aisles to the design of the parking lot. I insisted on extra-wide parking spaces, proper lighting, and security cameras covering every angle. Some called it excessive, but I knew from experience that a well-maintained parking lot was as important as what you put on your shelves. You don't build something meaningful without having a solid foundation at home. Behind every successful business is a support system that keeps you grounded when things get tough. For me, that's always been my family. My wife, Sarah, who stuck with me through the lean years when I was pulling double shifts at Megamart, and our twins, Emma and Ethan, who were just starting middle school when I decided to risk everything on my dream of opening Mountain Ridge Marketplace. Sarah's the practical one in our relationship. While I was busy dreaming up store layouts and vendor contracts, she was making sure we could still pay our mortgage if things went south. Dreams are great, she'd tell me, but they don't pay bills. She worked extra hours at her nursing job, picking up night shifts at the hospital to build our safety net. That's the kind of partnership that gets you through the tough times. When one person's reaching for the stars, the other keeps their feet on the ground. We lived modestly in a 3-bedroom ranch house about 20 minutes from what would become my store. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, and more importantly, it was paid for. Sarah's insistence on paying off the mortgage early meant we had equity to borrow against when we needed startup capital. If we're going to risk everything, she said, let's at least do it smart. The twins were 11 when we opened Mountain Ridge Marketplace. They'd grown up watching me leave before dawn and come home after dark, missing school plays and soccer games because corporate scheduling didn't care about family life. I promised them things would be different with our own business. We'll make it a family thing, I told them. You'll see, this store will be part of your legacy too. They took that promise seriously. Emma started creating hand-drawn signs for our produce section, while Ethan developed a whole system for organizing shopping carts by size. Kids see things differently. They don't get caught up in profit margins and overhead costs. They just want to make things better, more fun, more personal. Their enthusiasm reminded me why I started this venture in the first place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. We turned the store's break room into a second home. Sarah would bring dinner on busy nights, and the kids would do their homework at the conference table while I finished up paperwork. Our employees got used to seeing them around, and soon they became our store's unofficial mascots. Emma would help elderly customers reach high shelves, while Ethan became an expert at carrying groceries to cars. They weren't just hanging around. They were learning the value of hard work and community service firsthand. The first year was tough. There were nights I'd come home exhausted, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But Sarah would look at me with those steady eyes of hers and say, "Remember why we started this." She'd show me the kids' latest drawings of the store, their plans for community events, their ideas for making shopping more fun. Their belief in what we were building never wavered. We celebrated every small victory as a family. The first day, we broke even. The first 5-star review. The first time a customer brought us homemade cookies just to say thanks for being there. These weren't just business milestones. They were proof that our family's sacrifice was worth it. The twins started taking pride in telling their friends, "That's our store." They understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Living close to the store meant we were part of the community in a way corporate chains never could be. We shopped at local businesses, attended neighborhood meetings, and got to know our customers as people, not just transactions. The kids' school was nearby, and soon their classmates' parents became regular customers. Word spread that Mountain Ridge Marketplace wasn't just another grocery store. It was a family business in the truest sense. Sarah and I made sure to teach the twins about responsibility along the way. They earned their allowance by helping at the store, learning everything from inventory management to customer service. If you're going to inherit this someday, I'd tell them, you need to understand every aspect of the business. They soaked it up like sponges, proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. That's why what happened with the HOA hit us so hard. It wasn't just attacking my business, it was threatening everything we'd built as a family. When customers started complaining they couldn't find parking because of all the residential cars taking up spaces, I saw the worry in Sarah's eyes. When the twins reported that their classmates' parents were shopping elsewhere because our lot was always full, I knew we had to take action. This wasn't just about protecting a parking lot, it was about defending our family's future. Running a successful grocery store is all about routine and attention to detail. My day started at 4:30 a.m. long before the sun even thought about rising. I'd pull into the empty parking lot, the headlights of my truck sweeping across those 48 spaces that represented the lifeblood of our business. First order of business? Walk in the lot. Some might call it obsessive, but I checked every single parking space, making sure there wasn't so much as a gum wrapper marring our property. The parking lot lights, all 24 of them, were strategically placed to eliminate any dark corners. I'd invested in LED fixtures that cast a warm, inviting glow rather than that harsh fluorescent glare you see at most stores. It wasn't just about security. It was about creating an atmosphere. When customers pulled in, I wanted them to feel safe, welcome, like they were pulling into their own driveway. Every Monday morning, I'd do a detailed inspection of the line painting. Crisp, clean lines matter. They show you care about the details. I'd contracted with premium pavement services for quarterly restriping, but I touched up any faded spots myself. The handicap spaces were always pristine, with fresh blue paint and clear signage. We had 6 of them, 2 more than required by law, positioned closest to our automatic doors. Inside the store, my morning routine was like a well-choreographed dance. By 5 a.m., I'd be checking the produce deliveries, ensuring every fruit and vegetable met our standards. Our suppliers knew my reputation, if it wasn't fresh enough. For my own family's table, it wasn't going on our shelves. The produce section faced the front windows, creating an inviting display visible from the parking lot. When customers pulled in, their first view was always of colorful, fresh produce. Under perfect lighting, the bakery fired up at 5:30 a.m. sharp. Maria, our head baker for the past 4 years, had the timing down to a science. The smell of fresh bread would start wafting through the store just as our early bird customers began arriving. We'd prop open the front doors when weather permitted, letting that irresistible aroma drift across the parking lot. It's amazing how many people would follow their nose right into our store. By 6 a.m., the morning crew would start arriving. I made a point of greeting each employee by name, asking about their families, their studies, their lives. We had a mix of full-time staff and part-time students, all local, all carefully chosen. Training was thorough. Everyone learned every department. Even our teenage baggers could tell you the difference between organic and conventional produce, or recommend the perfect cut of meat for a special occasion. The shopping carts, that was another obsession of mine. Every hour on the hour, someone would collect carts from the lot. We had designated cart returns strategically placed, but even if a customer left a cart in a parking space, it wouldn't stay there long. Each cart was inspected daily, wheels oiled weekly, and replaced at the first sign of wobble. Nothing ruins a shopping experience like a cart with a bad wheel. Our parking lot became known as the cleanest in town. Every night at closing, we'd sweep it clean, power wash it monthly, and keep the landscaping around the perimeter immaculate. The small islands between parking rows featured drought-resistant native plants, maintained by a local landscaping company. Even in winter, when everything else looked grey and lifeless, our lot had character. Security cameras covered every angle of the property, feeding into monitors in my office. Not the obvious, intimidating kind you see at big box stores, but discreet, professional equipment that provided peace of mind without making customers feel watched. The footage was stored for 90 days, a decision that would prove crucial when the HOA situation escalated. Most important was our 15-minute rule. No customer should ever have to circle the lot looking for parking. We had staff designated to direct traffic during peak hours, helping people find spots quickly and efficiently. During holiday seasons, we'd even set up a temporary valet service. It cost us extra in labor, but the goodwill it generated was worth every penny. This wasn't just about maintaining property, it was about creating an experience. Every detail mattered, from the clear signage to the well-maintained storm drains that prevented puddles after rain. Our customers noticed. They'd comment on how they felt safe shopping late at night, how they appreciated the extra-wide parking spaces that made loading groceries easier, how the whole property felt more like a high-end retail destination than a typical grocery store. Before the HOA nightmare began, we had the perfect neighbors in Parkview Business Center across the street. The professional complex housed a medical clinic, a law firm, and several other respectable businesses. Dr. Anderson's family practice had been there for 20 years, and he was one of our first supporters when we opened Mountain Ridge Marketplace. His staff would come over for lunch breaks, and he'd often recommend our organic section to patients looking to improve their diets. The law firm, Jackson and Associates, was equally considerate. Their managing partner, Lisa Jackson, understood the value of good business relationships. They had their own dedicated parking structure, and she made sure her employees and clients respected our property. If someone accidentally parked in our lot, she'd personally come apologize and have them move their car immediately. That's how professional neighbors should behave. Next door to us was Tim's Auto Care, a family-owned mechanic shop that had been there for 3 generations. Tim Sr. was old school, believed in doing things right the first time and treating neighbors like family. He kept his portion of the shared access road immaculate and would even help plow our lot during heavy snowstorms. Good neighbors. Look out for each other, he'd say, refusing any payment beyond a cup of coffee and some fresh pastries from our bakery. The relationship with these businesses wasn't just cordial, it was mutually beneficial. We'd cater their office meetings, they'd recommend us to their clients, and together we maintained the kind of business district that attracted customers. From all over town, during local business association meetings, we'd collaborate on improvements for the area, better street lighting, seasonal decorations, joint promotional events. Our parking arrangement was simple and effective. Each business respected the other's spaces. During busy hours, we'd sometimes share overflow parking through formal agreements. If Tim's had a big repair job that required extra space, he'd call ahead, and we'd reserve a few spots for his customers. When the medical clinic hosted their annual health fair, we'd coordinate our deliveries to free up extra parking for their attendees. The business community had an unwritten code of conduct. We all understood that our success was interconnected. The medical clinic's patients would often stop by our store for prescriptions at our pharmacy and pick up groceries while they waited. Law firm clients would grab lunch from our deli between meetings. Tim's customers would shop while their cars were being serviced. It was a perfect ecosystem of local businesses supporting each other. We even had quarterly business neighbor meetings hosted on rotation at each property. We'd discuss common concerns, share updates on property improvements, and coordinate marketing efforts. During these meetings, we'd often talk about parking management, how to handle peak hours, special events, and seasonal rushes. Everyone contributed ideas and respected the solutions we agreed upon. The property manager for Parkview Business Center, Margaret Chen, was especially proactive. She maintained detailed records of parking assignments and made sure all new tenants understood the parking protocols. If there were any issues, she addressed them immediately. Prevention is better than cure, she'd say, and she was right. Her attention to detail helped prevent most problems before they could start. Our security teams worked together too. We shared information about any suspicious activities, coordinated patrol schedules, and had a joint emergency response plan. During holiday seasons, when retail theft typically increases, the other businesses would keep an eye on our property and report anything unusual. This mutual support system made everyone feel safer. The landscaping between properties created a unified, professional appearance. We'd coordinated with our neighbors to plant similar trees and shrubs, creating a seamless look along the street. During spring and fall, we'd organize joint cleanup days, working together to keep our entire block looking pristine. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. The city had awarded our business district Most Beautiful Commercial Area 3 years running. Even our waste management was coordinated. We shared recycling facilities with the business center, splitting the costs and ensuring proper sorting. This cooperation not only saved money, but also helped all of us meet our environmental responsibility goals. The city often cited our business district as an example of successful commercial cooperation. Looking back, those were the golden days of running Mountain Ridge Marketplace. Every morning I'd arrive to an orderly parking lot, knowing our neighbors had our backs just as we had theirs. We didn't just coexist. We thrived together, proving that local businesses could create something special when they worked as a team. The first sign of change came when Parkview Business Center sold to a real estate investment firm based out of New York. Cedar Valley Properties LLC promised to revitalize the area, but none of us local business owners liked the sound of that. Within months, they'd pushed out most of the long-term tenants with aggressive rent increases. Dr. Anderson's clinic relocated across town, Lisa Jackson's law firm consolidated with a bigger practice downtown, and several smaller businesses simply closed their doors. The transformation was painful to watch. Where professional offices once stood, Cedar Valley started converting spaces into high-density residential units. They called it mixed-use development, but there was nothing mixed about it. They were cramming as many apartments as possible into the former office spaces with complete disregard for parking infrastructure. The original parking structure, designed for daytime business use, suddenly had to accommodate hundreds of residential vehicles 24/7. I remember the day Tim Sr. came into my store, shaking his head after a meeting with Cedar Valley's representatives. "They're going to destroy everything we built here," he said, clutching a letter that doubled his rent. His son was taking over the business, but they'd have to relocate. 3 generations of service to our community ended by corporate greed. The day Tim's Auto Care closed its doors was like attending a funeral. Customers brought cards, shared memories, and more. Then a few tears were shed. The construction seemed endless. Every morning brought new trucks, more noise, more dust, coating our windows and produce displays. Cedar Valley's project manager, a slick guy named Brandon Wells, would stop by occasionally with fake apologies and empty promises about temporary inconveniences. He'd grab a coffee from our cafe, flash his practiced smile, and assure me the disruption would be worth it. "Think of all the new customers you'll have," he'd say, completely missing the point that we were losing our business. Community. Margaret Chen was the last to go. She fought Cedar Valley's changes until the end, documenting every violation, filing complaints with the city, and trying to protect the remaining tenants. The day she handed over her keys, she came to say goodbye. "Watch your parking lot," she warned me. "They don't care about property lines or agreements. Everything to them is just space to be exploited." The transition happened faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, Parkview Business Center was transformed into the residences at Westbrook Plaza. The marketing materials showed glossy images of luxury apartments and trendy retail spaces, but the reality was far different. They'd packed in twice as many units as the building was designed for, with barely any thought given to infrastructure or community impact. The new property management company run by a woman named Victoria Pierce was nothing like Margaret. Where Margaret had been professional and proactive, Victoria was dismissive and confrontational. Our first interaction set the tone for everything that would follow. She strutted into my store one afternoon, designer handbag swinging, and announced that her residents would be using our parking lot as overflow parking, not asked. Announced. I tried to explain our parking situation politely, showing her our customer data and peak hours analysis. She cut me off mid-sentence. "Look," she said, examining her manicure, "your lot is half empty most evenings anyway. Our residents need somewhere to park. It's called being a good neighbor." The irony of her lecturing me about being a good neighbor after everything they'd destroyed was almost too much to bear. That evening I sat in my office looking at old photos of the business district. There was one from our first Christmas season. All the business owners standing together, holding a giant check for the local food bank. Dr. Anderson, Lisa Jackson, Tim Sr., Margaret Chen, faces of people who understood what it meant to be part of a community. Now they were all gone, replaced by a corporate machine that saw our neighborhood as nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet. I knew right then that everything was about to change. The peace we'd built, the mutual respect, the sense of community. It was all hanging by a thread. As I watched the sun set over the now unfamiliar skyline of Westbrook Plaza, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them take what we'd built, not without a fight. Victoria Pierce's true colors showed within a week of our first encounter. It started with a few cars here and there, residents from Westbrook Plaza leaving their vehicles overnight, in our lot. At first, I tried to be understanding. Maybe they were unaware of property lines, maybe they were just settling in and figuring out the parking situation. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. One Tuesday morning I arrived, to find a bright blue Tesla parked diagonally across two of our prime spots near the entrance. No shopping bags in sight, just a Westbrook Plaza parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror. Inside the car was a note with Victoria's business card paperclipped to it. Temporary overflow parking arrangement. Management. The audacity of it made my blood boil. No discussion, no agreement, just a unilateral decision that my private property was now their extended parking lot. I walked across the street to Westbrook Plaza's leasing office, Victoria's card clutched in my hand. The office was all chrome and glass now, nothing like the warm, professional space Margaret used to maintain. A young receptionist with a Bluetooth earpiece barely looked up from her phone as I requested to speak with Victoria. "Ms. Pierce is in a meeting," she said, clearly uninterested. "I can take a message. Tell her she needs to have the Tesla moved from my property immediately," I replied, keeping my voice level but firm. The receptionist sighed dramatically, as if I was ruining her entire day. "I'll pass it along when she's available." By noon, the Tesla hadn't moved. Instead, 3 more vehicles with Westbrook Plaza permits had appeared in my lot. I called the leasing office again. No answer. Sent an email. No response. Left a voicemail? Nothing. They were stonewalling me and doing it deliberately. That evening, Victoria finally deigned to respond, not by coming to speak with me, but with a mass email sent to all Westbrook Plaza residents. Someone forwarded it to me. "Dear valued residents, due to our ongoing parking structure maintenance, we've arranged for overflow parking at the adjacent Mountain Ridge Marketplace lot. Please ensure you display your Westbrook Plaza parking permit when using these spaces. Best regards, Victoria Pierce, Property Manager." I printed that email and highlighted the word "arranged." No arrangement had been made, no agreement had been signed. No compensation had been offered. They were simply taking what they wanted, assuming I wouldn't stand up to them. The next morning, I put up new signs at every entrance to our lot. Private property, customer parking only, 2-hour limit. Within an hour, Victoria stormed into my store, her heels clicking aggressively across the floor. She waved one of the signs in my face, her expression a mix of entitlement and rage. "What is this?" she demanded, loud enough for customers to turn and stare. I kept my voice calm, professional. "Those are parking regulation signs for my private property." "You can't do this," she hissed. "We have an arrangement." "No, Miss Pierce, we don't. You sent an email making claims about my property without my consent. That's not an arrangement." Her face flushed red. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Cedar Valley Properties owns half this neighborhood. We can make things very difficult for you." "Is that a threat?" I asked, still maintaining my composure. She straightened her designer blazer, trying to regain her corporate cool. It's a reality check. Be reasonable about this. Your lot is empty half the time anyway. What's the harm in sharing? The harm is that it's my private property, purchased and maintained with my money for my customers. If you need additional parking, perhaps you should have considered that before converting an office building into high-density residential units. Victoria's mask slipped again. "This isn't over," she snapped, turning on her heel and storming out. She was right about one thing: it wasn't over, not by a long shot. That confrontation was just the opening shot in what would become a full-scale, parking war. But Victoria and her corporate overlords at Cedar Valley had made a critical mistake. They thought I was just another small business owner they could bully into submission. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That Friday night, 3 days after my confrontation with Victoria, I discovered exactly what she meant by "this isn't over." Around 7 p.m., just as we were hitting our evening rush, cars started pouring into our lot. Not customers, Westbrook Plaza residents, all displaying their parking permits like badges of defiance. They took up space after space, filling nearly 3/4 of our lot with their personal vehicles. I watched from my office window as my actual customers circled the lot helplessly, unable to find parking. Some gave up and drove away. Others parked across the street at the gas station, risking getting towed themselves just to shop at our store. The sight of loyal customers struggling because of this deliberate sabotage made my stomach churn. Sarah called around 7:30, her voice tight with concern. "Have you seen what's happening on social media?" She sent me a link to the Westbrook Plaza residents' Facebook group. Someone had posted screenshots of our parking signs along with Victoria's message: "Show them we won't be intimidated. Park wherever you want. They can't tow all of us." The comment section was filled with entitled responses. "Who does this grocery store think they are? That lot is empty most nights anyway. If they won't share, we'll take it." By 8 p.m., Mrs. Rodriguez, our evening shift supervisor, was in my office looking panicked. "Mr. Harrison, we've had 3 customers fall on their way in from the gas station parking lot. They had to carry their groceries across that busy street because there's no parking here. Someone's going to get hurt." She was right. This wasn't just about inconvenience anymore. It was becoming dangerous. I'd worked in retail long enough to know that it only takes one accident, one injury, to destroy everything you've built. The liability alone could bankrupt us. I tried calling the police non-emergency line. The officer who answered sounded bored. "Sorry, sir, but this is a civil matter. Unless there's property damage or violence, we can't intervene. You'll need to handle this through proper channels." Around 9 p.m., I went outside to document the situation. As I took photos of the illegally parked vehicles, a group of young residents spotted me. They were coming back from what looked like a night out, clearly tipsy and feeling bold. "Hey, it's the parking Nazi!" one of them shouted, drawing laughs from his friends. "What's wrong, old man? Can't share your precious parking spots?" I ignored them, continuing to photograph license plates and parking permits. Another resident, a woman in her 20s wearing a Westbrook Plaza t-shirt, they had merchandise now, decided to make a show of it. She walked right up to me, phone recording. "This is the owner," she announced to her social media followers. "The one who thinks he owns the whole neighborhood. Say hi to TikTok." The harassment continued for several minutes. More residents joined in, some recording, others just watching and laughing. I maintained my composure, finished documenting the vehicles and headed back inside. But their words followed me. "What are you going to do, tow everyone? Good luck staying in business when the whole community hates you. Maybe if you weren't so selfish, we wouldn't have to do this." That night after closing, I sat in my dark office, looking at the still full parking lot. Through the window, I could see residents coming and going, treating my property like their personal parking garage. Some were having what looked like a tailgate party around their cars, leaving beer cans and food wrappers scattered across my carefully maintained lot. My phone buzzed. Another email from Victoria. I trust tonight has helped you reconsider your position on our parking arrangement. I'm available tomorrow to discuss a more reasonable approach to this situation. The message was clear. Submit to their demands, or this would become our new normal. They thought they could break me through. Harassment and intimidation. They thought I would cave to protect my business. What they didn't understand was that giving in to bullies never makes them stop. It only encourages them to take more. I'd built this business from nothing, poured my life savings into it, created jobs for local families, and served this community faithfully. I wasn't about to let a bunch of entitled residents and their corporate overlords take what wasn't theirs. That Saturday morning, I arrived at the store at my usual time, 4:30 a.m. The parking lot was still full of Westbrook Plaza residents' cars, their owners sleeping soundly in their luxury apartments while my business suffered. Instead of heading straight inside, I walked to each vehicle, documenting every license plate, permit number, and parking violation in meticulous detail. By 6 a.m., I had compiled a complete record. 43 vehicles, none belonging to customers, all clearly displaying Westbrook Plaza permits. I'd taken photographs from multiple angles, noted timestamps, and even recorded a video walking through the lot showing the scale of the invasion. Then I did something that would set everything in motion. I called Victoria's office and left one final warning. Miss Pierce, this is James Harrison from Mountain Ridge Marketplace. You have exactly 2 hours to have every Westbrook Plaza vehicle removed from my lot. After that, I will be exercising my right as a property owner to remove unauthorized vehicles. Consider this your formal notice. I knew she wouldn't get the message until later. And that was exactly the point. I wanted everything documented, every attempt at reasonable communication recorded. What happened next would be on them, not me. At 7 a.m., I called Roger at Reliable Towing Service. I'd done my research. They were licensed, insured, and had a spotless record with the Better Business Bureau. More importantly, they had the capacity to handle multiple vehicles simultaneously. Roger, I need every truck you've got. I have 43 unauthorized vehicles on my property that need to be removed. Yes, 43. No, this isn't a joke. I have all the documentation, and I'm prepared to sign whatever you need. How quickly? Can you get here? Roger was professional but concerned. Mr. Harrison, are you sure about this? Mass towing can get complicated. There's going to be a lot of angry people. I'm sure, Roger. These people were warned. They chose to ignore those warnings. Now they can deal with the consequences. He paused for a moment. All right. I can have 5 trucks there within the hour. We'll need you to sign liability waivers and confirm each vehicle individually before removal. This isn't going to be cheap. Send me the paperwork now. I'll have it ready when you arrive. While waiting for the tow trucks, I called my lawyer, David Chen. He'd helped me set up the business years ago and knew every detail of our property. Rights. I explained the situation and asked him to come down immediately. They're going to try to fight this, he warned, but I could hear him gathering his things. Be ready for backlash. That's why I need you here, I replied. Everything has to be by the book. David arrived before the tow trucks, briefcase in hand. We went through my documentation, and he nodded approvingly at my thoroughness. You've done this right, he said, reviewing the photos and warning notices. They won't have a legal leg to stand on, but that won't stop them from trying. At exactly 8:15 a.m., Roger's fleet arrived. 5 tow trucks lined up along the street, their yellow lights flashing in the morning sun. It must have looked like a military operation to anyone watching. David supervised as I signed the paperwork, making sure every I was dotted and every T crossed. The first vehicle they hooked up was the blue Tesla, Victoria's little power play from earlier in the week. As the hydraulics whined and the car lifted off the ground, I saw movement across the street. Someone must have alerted the residents because people started pouring out of Westbrook Plaza, many still in pajamas and robes. Victoria arrived just as the second car was being hooked up. She came charging across the street, face flushed with rage, designer heels, completely inappropriate for her rushed morning exit. "Stop this immediately!" she shrieked. "You can't do this!" David stepped forward, calm and professional. "Actually, Ms. Pierce, he can, and he is. This is private property, and these vehicles are being removed in accordance with state law." Victoria pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," David replied, holding up his briefcase. "I have all the relevant legal documentation right here. We'll be happy to show them." The next hour was chaos. Police arrived, reviewed our documentation, and confirmed we were within our rights. Residents screamed and threatened lawsuits. Some tried to rush to their cars to move them, only to find them already hooked up to tow trucks. Through it all, I stood quietly with David, watching as car after car was removed from my property. The aftermath of what residents quickly dubbed the Saturday morning massacre was immediate and intense. While Roger's team was still removing the last few vehicles, Victoria had already mobilized her response. She stormed into my store, not alone this time, but flanked by two men in expensive suits. One I recognized as Brandon Wells from Cedar Valley Properties. The other introduced himself as their attorney, Richard Maxwell. "This is unacceptable," Brandon started, his corporate smile nowhere to be seen. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've just done to our community relations? The PR nightmare this is going to create?" I sat behind my desk, David Chen still by my side, feeling the weight of 3 hostile stares, but remaining unmoved. "Damage to community relations?" I repeated slowly. "Let's talk about damage. Let's talk about how your residents deliberately blocked my customers' access. Let's talk about the harassment my staff has endured. Let's talk about the literal garbage they left all over my property last night." Richard Maxwell cleared his throat, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. "Mr. Harrison, we're prepared to be reasonable about this. Obviously, there's been a miscommunication about parking arrangements. If you'll agree to immediately release the vehicles and cover the towing charges, we can discuss a formal, shared parking agreement that benefits everyone." Victoria smiled triumphantly, clearly thinking they had me cornered. But David was ready. "Interesting proposal," David said, opening his own briefcase. "Before we discuss that, I have some documentation I'd like to share." He pulled out a thick folder. "These are photographs of the harassment my client's customers endured last night. These are screenshots of Ms. Pierce's email encouraging residents to deliberately occupy private property. And these," he paused for effect, "are statements from customers who were forced to park across a busy street, creating significant liability issues." Brandon's face tightened. "Those customers chose to park there. That's not our responsibility. They chose to park there because your residents were illegally occupying private property," I countered. "And speaking of responsibility, let's discuss the social media posts, the ones where your residents bragged about intentionally blocking my customers, the ones where they recorded themselves harassing me on my own property." Richard Maxwell's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Social media posts can be deleted." "They already have been," David replied smoothly, "but not before we archived everything. Would you like to see the timestamps of when those posts were deleted?" Interestingly, they all disappeared right after the tow trucks arrived, almost as if someone sent out instructions to destroy evidence. Victoria's face went pale. She whispered something to Brandon, who shook his head sharply. "Mr. Harrison," Brandon tried again, his voice taking on a threatening edge, "you're making a serious mistake here. Cedar Valley Properties has significant influence in this community. We have relationships with suppliers, vendors, local officials. Do you really want to make enemies of us?" I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eye. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Wells? Because that would make an interesting addition to our documentation." "Not at all," he backpedaled quickly. I'm simply pointing out the potential consequences of your actions. The consequences of my actions? I stood up slowly. I've documented every vehicle removal. I have photographs of every parking permit. I have video evidence of your residents' behavior. I have copies of Ms. Pierce's emails encouraging this situation. And now I have witnesses to what sounds very much like a threat from a Cedar Valley Properties representative. Would you like to discuss consequences further? The room fell silent. Richard Maxwell was scribbling frantically in his notebook. Victoria looked like she might explode. Brandon's corporate mask had completely crumbled. This isn't over, Victoria spat, echoing her words from days earlier. You're right, I agreed. It's not. Because the next time your residents park on my property, I'll do exactly the same thing. And the time after that, and every time after that. I built this business through hard work and dedication, and I will not be bullied into surrendering what's rightfully mine. True to her word, Victoria wasted no time escalating the situation. By Sunday morning, my inbox was flooded with angry emails from Westbrook Plaza residents demanding compensation for their towing fees. Local news vans had started circling the block like vultures, hoping to catch the next chapter of what they were calling the Great Parking War of Millbrook Street. But the most disturbing development came from my suppliers. Suddenly, our regular delivery drivers were unavailable. Orders were mysteriously delayed or cancelled. Fresh produce sat wilting in warehouses while our shelves grew increasingly bare. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Cedar Valley Properties was flexing its muscles, calling in favors, trying to squeeze my business through their relationships. I was in my office reviewing alternative supplier options when Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my door. Her face was tense, worried. Mr. Harrison, you need to see this. She handed me her phone, open to the Westbrook Plaza Residents Forum. My heart sank as I scrolled through dozens of one-star reviews of my store, all posted within the last 24 hours. Found glass in my produce. Don't shop here. Staff was incredibly rude and discriminatory. Got food poisoning from their deli section. All lies, all coordinated, all designed to destroy my business's reputation that I'd spent years building. But they hadn't stopped there. The posts became increasingly personal. Anyone. Know where the owner lives? Asking for a friend? Maybe his car needs to be towed too. Wonder how he'd like it if we followed him home. I called David immediately. They're making threats now, I said, forwarding him screenshots. And they're trying to destroy my business with fake reviews. Document everything, he replied. Every review, every threat, every cancelled delivery. They're getting desperate, which means they're getting sloppy. This kind of coordinated harassment campaign is exactly what we need to build our case. Around noon, Brandon Wells showed up again, this time alone. His approach was different, softer, almost sympathetic. Look, James, he said, using my first name like we were old friends. This has gotten out of hand. Victoria's passionate about her job, but she shouldn't have handled things this way. Let's talk about a real solution. I gestured to my nearly empty produce section, visible through the office window. A real solution, like how my suppliers suddenly can't deliver to my store, like how your residents are posting fake reviews and making threats against me and my family. Brandon had the decency to look uncomfortable. We didn't authorize any of that. But you're not stopping it either, I pointed out. You're hoping the pressure will make me cave. Well, let me be clear. It won't, he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. What do you want, James? Money? We can compensate you for the parking spaces. A formal agreement with significant monthly payments. Name your price. For a moment I just stared at him, wondering if he really understood so little about people like me. This isn't about money, Brandon. This is about right and wrong. This is about respect for private property and playing by the rules. You can't just buy your way out of everything. Everyone has a price, he insisted. "Then you don't know me at all," I replied. "Now, unless you're here to shop, I'll have to ask you to leave. We have a strict no loitering policy." As he turned to go, something made me call after him. "Brandon, those suppliers you've pressured? I've already found new ones. Local farmers, independent distributors, people who don't care about Cedar Valley's influence. You can't starve me out, you can't threaten me out, and you certainly can't buy me out." He paused at the door. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I corrected him. "I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be. Because sometimes standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always worth it." Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became painfully clear. Every Friday and Saturday night, Westbrook Plaza residents would flood my parking lot, and every Saturday and Sunday morning, I'd have their cars towed. It became a costly war of attrition. They were spending thousands on towing fees, while I was spending hours documenting each incident and dealing with the fallout. The harassment evolved too. They got creative with their tactics. Someone signed my store up for dozens of fake delivery services, leaving our phones ringing constantly with phantom orders. Others would come in, fill shopping carts with perishables, then abandon them throughout the store. One group even staged a protest in my parking lot, complete with signs calling me a business tyrant and community enemy number one. But the most disturbing trend was the escalating hostility toward my employees. Young cashiers were being verbally abused by angry residents. Our baggers were getting harassed in the parking lot. Even our elderly greeter, Mr. Peterson, had water thrown at him by someone screaming about towing fees. I called an emergency staff meeting one morning before opening. "I understand if any of you want to quit," I told them, looking at their tired faces. "This isn't what you signed up for. I'll provide glowing references, help you find new positions. No hard feelings." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up first. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrison, we're not going anywhere. These bullies don't get to win." One by one, others voiced their support. Jenny, our youngest cashier, spoke up. "My grandmother always shopped here. She said this store was different because you treated people with respect. We're not letting them destroy that." Their loyalty moved me deeply, but it also added to my burden. These people were counting on me, trusting me to protect not just the business but them as well. I immediately implemented new safety protocols: security escorts to cars, buddy systems for brakes, cameras covering every angle of the store. The next incident proved we needed every precaution. It was a busy Thursday afternoon when a group of Westbrook Plaza residents decided to stage what they called a shopping strike. 20 people entered the store simultaneously, each grabbing a cart. They proceeded to fill every cart with ice cream, frozen foods, and perishables. Then, at a signal from their leader, they all abandoned their carts in different aisles and walked out laughing. Thousands of dollars of product ruined. But they hadn't counted on our new security cameras catching everything, including their coordinated plan discussion in the parking lot beforehand. When I showed the footage to David, he smiled for the first time in weeks. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "Coordinated vandalism, clear intent to cause damage. We can file criminal charges now." But before we could act, they upped the ante again. Late that night, after closing, someone spray-painted "Parking Nazi" across our front windows in huge red letters. Our security cameras caught the act, but the perpetrator wore a mask. The next morning, as my team worked to clean off the graffiti, Victoria Pierce had the audacity to walk by. "Shame about the vandalism," she said, not even trying to hide her smirk. "Maybe if you were more reasonable about parking, things like this wouldn't happen." I kept scrubbing at the paint. "You know what's interesting, Victoria? Every time your residents escalate, they give us more evidence. More proof of harassment, vandalism, and coordinated attacks. Keep it up. You're only making our case stronger." Her smirk faltered slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. We can't control what individuals do. Really? Then you won't. Mind if I share with the police the video of you meeting with the shopping strike organizers in your office yesterday? Or the screenshots of you approving these protests in the residents' forum? She left without another word. But I knew this wasn't over. They had moved from parking disputes to outright vandalism. The question was, what would they try next? I'd had enough of playing defense. It was time to take this to someone with real authority. Armed with 3 weeks' worth of documentation, security footage, screenshots, and witness statements, I headed to City Hall to meet with the zoning board and property commissioner's office. The waiting room was all polished marble and uncomfortable chairs, designed to make you feel small and insignificant. But I wasn't here to feel small. I was here to be heard. After an hour of waiting, Commissioner Sandra Martinez finally called me into her office. "Mr. Harrison," she said, not looking up from her computer, "I understand you have concerns about parking disputes with Westbrook Plaza." I placed my thick folder of evidence on her desk. "This isn't about parking disputes anymore, Commissioner. This is about organized harassment, vandalism, and potential criminal activity." That got her attention. She looked up, eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "Those are serious allegations, which is why I've documented everything." I opened the folder, laying out photographs of the vandalism, printouts of the coordinated harassment campaigns, and statements from customers who'd been intimidated. Cedar Valley Properties and their management company aren't just allowing this behavior, they're encouraging it. Commissioner Martinez picked up a photo of the graffiti incident. "Have you filed police reports?" "Multiple times. But the police say it's a civil matter unless they catch someone in the act. Meanwhile, my business is being systematically attacked." She frowned, reading through the residents' forum posts. "These threats are concerning, but what exactly are you expecting my office to do?" "I want you to investigate Cedar Valley's conversion permits," I replied. "They turned an office building into high-density residential units without adequate parking infrastructure. They're using my private property to solve their self-created problem." She shuffled through some papers on her desk. "The conversion was approved by the previous commissioner, was it?" I pulled out another document, a copy of the original building plans I'd obtained through a public records request. According to city code, they should have provided 1.5 parking spaces per residential unit. They have 200 units, but only 150 parking spaces. That's a deficit of 150 spaces. Commissioner Martinez's eyebrows rose. "Where did you get these plans?" "Public Records Office. I also have documentation showing they modified the building plans after approval, adding more units without updating their parking infrastructure. That's a violation of City Ordinance 47.3, isn't it?" She was fully engaged now, making notes. "Yes, it is. But these kinds of violations are usually handled with fines. Commissioner, they're not just violating zoning laws, they're actively encouraging their residents to trespass on private property to solve their parking shortage. When I enforce my property rights, they respond with vandalism and harassment. How many laws do they have to break before someone takes action?" She leaned back, studying me. "You understand that investigating this could take months?" "I understand. But while you investigate, I need something else." I pulled out a formal request I'd prepared. "I want official confirmation from your office that my property is private and that I have the right to remove unauthorized vehicles, something I can post that carries the city's authority." She read through the request carefully. "This is unusually thorough." "I've learned to be thorough. Every time I take action, they try to twist it against me. I need official backing that what I'm doing is legal and justified." Commissioner Martinez was quiet for a long moment, looking through the evidence again. Finally, she reached for her phone. "Janet, cancel my next appointment." and get me the Cedar Valley Properties file, all of it. She turned back to me. Mr. Harrison, this is going to take some time, but you've raised serious concerns about both the zoning violations and their response to your legitimate property rights enforcement. I'm going to look into this personally. Thank you, Commissioner. But what about the harassment in the meantime? She picked up my request form. I'll have this signed and officially notarized by tomorrow morning. Post it prominently. Anyone who chooses to ignore an official city notice will have a much harder time claiming ignorance of the law. As I left her office, I felt a glimmer of hope. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously, but I knew Cedar Valley and Victoria wouldn't go down without a fight. This was just the beginning of a much larger battle. With Commissioner Martinez's official notice in hand, I decided to upgrade our entire security and documentation system. If Cedar Valley wanted to play hardball, I'd make sure every move they made was captured in crystal clear detail. I invested in a state-of-the-art surveillance system, 16 high-definition cameras with night vision and motion detection covering every inch of my property. But I didn't stop there. I hired Marcus Chen, a former military intelligence officer turned private security consultant, to help set up what he called an evidence-gathering infrastructure. Marcus understood exactly what we needed. He'd dealt with similar corporate bullying tactics before. They're counting on you not being able to prove their involvement, Marcus explained as he installed the new system. Most small business owners don't have the resources or knowledge to document everything properly. That's what we're going to change. The system he designed was comprehensive. Each camera fed into a secure cloud storage system, backing up footage automatically. We installed specialized license plate recognition software that could track repeat offenders. Even the lighting in the parking lot was upgraded to ensure perfect visibility for the cameras. Here's the clever part, Marcus said, showing me the monitoring setup in my office. We've got AI-powered analytics that can detect suspicious behavior patterns, multiple people arriving simultaneously, coordinated movements, even unusual parking patterns. The system learns what's normal customer behavior and flags anything suspicious. The cost was significant, nearly $50,000 for the complete setup. But as Marcus pointed out, it was an investment in protection. Think of it as insurance, he said. Every piece of evidence you gather is another nail in their coffin if this goes to court. We also implemented a new documentation protocol for staff. Every incident, no matter how small, would be logged with time, date, and details. Employees were given body cameras to wear during their shifts, protecting them from false accusations. I even set up a dedicated email address for customers to send their own photos and videos of harassment they witnessed. The most important addition was the new signage. Not just Commissioner Martinez's official notice, but clear, professional signs at every entrance. Notice, this property is under 24-hour video surveillance. All incidents of trespassing, vandalism, or harassment will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. By entering this property, you acknowledge that your actions may be recorded and used as evidence in legal proceedings. Marcus helped me position the signs strategically, ensuring they were clearly visible and legally binding. Make sure you get photos of these signs being installed, he advised. Document the date and time. They'll probably try to claim they didn't know they were being recorded. We also set up a dedicated security office near the front entrance, staffed by professional security guards from Marcus's firm. They weren't just there to prevent incidents. They were trained in proper evidence gathering and documentation. Each guard carried a body camera and knew exactly how to handle confrontations without escalating them. Remember, Marcus instructed his team, you're not just security guards, you're professional witnesses. Everything you see, everything you hear, document it. Be polite but firm. Don't give them any ammunition to use against us. The final piece of the puzzle was an automated towing response system. I contracted with 3 different towing companies, setting up a rotation so we'd never be caught short-handed. Each company had direct access to our license plate recognition system. As soon as an unauthorized vehicle was identified, the system would automatically dispatch the next available tow truck. Victoria noticed the changes immediately. I saw her walking the perimeter of our property early one morning, taking pictures of the new cameras and signs. She tried to look unbothered, but I could see the concern on her face. This wasn't part of their playbook. Small business owners weren't supposed to fight back this effectively. When Brandon Wells showed up later that day, his usual smooth confidence was replaced with visible anxiety. He stared at the security office, the cameras, the professional guards. "This is quite an investment," he said, trying to sound casual. "Seems a bit excessive for a grocery store." "Actually," I replied, "it's exactly what's needed when dealing with organized harassment and vandalism. Would you like a copy of our security protocols? I'm sure your legal team would find them interesting." He left without another word, but I knew we'd struck a nerve. They were used to dealing with weak opponents who would cave under pressure. Instead, they'd found someone who was willing to spend serious money to protect his rights. With our new security system in place, it didn't take long to capture exactly what we needed. The following Friday night, Victoria orchestrated what she probably thought would be her masterpiece of retaliation. Our cameras caught her meeting with a group of residents in the Westbrook Plaza lobby at 8 p.m., gesturing animatedly at a whiteboard. Thanks to our new high-powered microphones, we caught every word of her battle plan. "Tonight, we show them what happens when you mess with Westbrook Plaza," she announced to the gathered crowd. "We've got 70 cars ready. We park all at once, at exactly 9 p.m. They can't tow everyone immediately, and their precious cameras can't stop us if we move as a group. Their weekend business will be crippled." What Victoria didn't know was that Marcus had anticipated exactly this kind of mass action. We'd prepared a response plan that would turn their show of force into a very expensive lesson. At 8:45 p.m., I called all 3 of our contracted towing companies. "Be ready," I told them. "We're about to have a situation." Then I contacted the police non-emergency line, informing them of potential disturbance brewing. Finally, I activated our new mobile alert system, warning legitimate customers to use our temporary overflow lot behind the store. At precisely 9 p.m. they struck. It was like watching a choreographed dance. 70 cars streaming into our lot from different directions, their drivers clearly coordinating through phones or radios. They took up nearly every space, some even double parking to maximize the disruption. Victoria stood at the entrance of Westbrook Plaza, arms crossed, watching her plan unfold with a satisfied smirk. She even had the audacity to wave at our security cameras. That's when we launched our counter-operation. First, our automated system photographed every vehicle, capturing license plates, parking permits, and driver images. The AI instantly cross-referenced these with our database of previous offenders, prioritizing repeat violators. Then, like a well-oiled machine, our response began. 10 tow trucks arrived simultaneously, positioning themselves strategically around the lot. Our security team deployed, documenting everything with their body cameras. The police cruiser I'd requested rolled up, lights flashing, just to maintain order. The look on Victoria's face when she saw the scale of our response was priceless. Her smirk vanished as the first wave of tow trucks began hooking up vehicles. Residents came running out of Westbrook Plaza, shouting and protesting, but our preparation made their resistance futile. "This is private property," our security team announced through professional-grade PA systems. "Your vehicles are being towed in accordance with City Ordinance 47.3 as per the posted notices. Any interference with this process will result in criminal charges." Victoria tried to rally her troops, screaming about rights and intimidation, but the residents' enthusiasm crumbled as they watched car after car being towed. The cost was finally hitting home at $275 per tow, plus storage fees. Their little protest would cost them over $19,000. Brandon Wells arrived halfway through the operation, his face ashen. He tried to approach me, probably to negotiate, but I simply pointed to the nearest security camera. Everything's being recorded, Brandon. Every word, every action. Would you like to make a statement for our evidence files? He backed away, pulling out his phone and speaking urgently into it as he retreated. By midnight, our lot was clear again. 70 cars towed, all documented with perfect clarity. Our cameras had captured everything: the planning meeting, the coordinated invasion, and most importantly, Victoria's direct involvement in organizing it all. The next morning, I handed a complete evidence package to David: videos, photos, audio recordings, and detailed incident reports from our security team. He reviewed it with growing satisfaction. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "Clear evidence of organized harassment caught on multiple cameras, with their property manager directly involved. They just handed us a lawsuit on a silver platter." The Westbrook Plaza HOA called an emergency community meeting the following Monday evening. Through our network of sympathetic residents, turns out not everyone supported Victoria's parking crusade, I learned it was being held in their newly renovated community room. I decided to attend. After all, it was a public meeting, and I had every right to hear what they were saying about my business. Walking into that room was like stepping into hostile territory. Nearly 200 residents packed the space, many wearing "Save Our Parking" t-shirts that Victoria had apparently commissioned. The hostility was palpable. Whispers and glares followed me as I took a seat in the back corner. Marcus insisted on coming along, wearing plain clothes, but keeping his body camera running. Victoria stood at the podium, flanked by Brandon Wells and Richard Maxwell. She looked different. Gone was the polished property manager demeanor, replaced by something more desperate. The crowd hushed as she began speaking. "Over the past month, our community has been under attack," she declared, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "A local business owner has declared war on our residents, towing our vehicles indiscriminately, installing invasive surveillance equipment, and threatening our right to peaceful enjoyment of our neighborhood," the crowd murmured angrily. I noticed Brandon checking his phone constantly, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Last Friday night," Victoria continued, "he had 70 of our vehicles towed, causing nearly $20,000 in damages to our community members. This is nothing short of economic terrorism." That's when I stood up. "Would you like to tell them about the planning meeting you held before those 70 cars invaded my private property? The one where you specifically orchestrated this protest to damage my business?" The room erupted. Some residents turned to stare at me in shock. Others started shouting. Victoria's face went pale. "This is a private meeting," she snapped. "You have no right to be here." "Actually," I replied calmly, "this is a public HOA meeting in a commercially zoned building. I have every right to attend, just like I have every right to protect my private property from organized harassment." Brandon stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps this isn't the best forum for—" "I think it's exactly the right forum," I interrupted. "These people deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know that their property manager has been organizing illegal actions that could get them sued. They deserve to know that Cedar Valley Properties converted this building without proper parking infrastructure, creating this problem in the first place." An older resident stood up. "What do you mean, without proper parking infrastructure?" I pulled out copies of Commissioner Martinez's preliminary findings. "According to City Code, this building should have 300 parking spaces for 200 units. You have half that. Cedar Valley Properties knew this when they converted the building, but they did it anyway, assuming they could just use my lot as overflow parking." The room got quieter. People were listening now. "Your property manager," I continued, instead of addressing this violation, decided to encourage illegal parking and organize harassment campaigns against a local business. Every one of you who participated in Friday's protest could be named in a lawsuit. Is Victoria going to pay your legal fees? Is Cedar Valley Properties? Victoria tried to interrupt, but another resident spoke up. Is this true about the parking space requirements? I held up the official documents. Everything I'm saying is documented. Your HOA fees, they're being used to cover up Cedar Valley's zoning violations instead of improving your property. Those towing fees you're paying, they're the result of your property manager's illegal instructions, not my enforcement of legitimate property rights. Brandon was openly sweating now. Richard Maxwell was frantically writing notes. Victoria looked like she might explode. "You're lying," she shouted. "This is slander." Actually, Marcus spoke up from his seat. Everything Mr. Harrison has said is documented on video, including your meeting last Friday where you organized the parking protest. Would anyone like to see the footage? The room erupted again, but differently this time. Residents were turning on Victoria, demanding answers. Someone started passing around copies of the zoning requirements I'd brought. The carefully orchestrated meeting was unraveling. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, I received an unexpected visit from Detective Sarah Connor of the Commercial Crimes Division. She walked into my office unannounced, badge displayed, with the kind of confident stride that told me this wasn't a routine check-in. "Mr. Harrison," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "Commissioner Martinez forwarded some interesting documentation to our department. Mind walking me through what's been happening here?" For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. The parking violations, the harassment campaigns, the vandalism, Victoria's orchestrated protests, and Cedar Valley's attempts at economic pressure. Detective Connor took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting specific pieces of evidence. "You've been unusually thorough in your documentation," she observed, reviewing our security footage. "Most business owners don't invest in this level of surveillance. Most business owners aren't dealing with organized harassment from a multi-million-dollar corporation," I replied. I learned quickly that documentation was my only defense. She nodded, pulling out a thick file. "We've been investigating Cedar Valley Properties for months. Different properties, similar patterns. They buy buildings, convert them without proper permits, then use aggressive tactics to solve any problems. Their shortcuts create." My heart raced. This was bigger than our parking dispute. "Your situation caught our attention because it's the first time someone's fought back effectively," she continued. "Most victims either cave to the pressure or can't prove who's behind it. But you've given us something we've never had before, clear evidence of their methods." She spread out photographs across my desk, other properties, other neighborhoods. "They've done this in 3 other cities. Buy commercial properties, convert them to high-density residential without adequate parking or infrastructure, then bully neighboring businesses into solving their problems. And nobody stopped them. Small businesses can't afford to fight back. Local authorities are often influenced by their promises of urban renewal. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the damage is done." She paused, studying my reaction. "But you changed the game. Your evidence doesn't just prove harassment, it shows a pattern of deliberate corporate policy." I leaned forward. "What exactly are you investigating them for?" "Originally, just zoning violations and permit fraud. But now," she gestured to our footage of Victoria's planning meeting, "we're looking at organized harassment, criminal conspiracy, and potential RICO violations. Their entire business model appears to be built on systematic violation of property rights and intimidation of local businesses." My security system pinged. Brandon Wells had just pulled into our parking lot. Perfect timing. Detective Connor smiled, pulling out her badge. "Mind if I stick around for this conversation?" Brandon walked in. his usual corporate confidence faltering slightly when he saw the detective's badge on my desk. "James, we need to talk about—" He stopped mid-sentence, finally registering Detective Connor's presence. "Mr. Wells," she stood, extending her hand. "Commercial Crimes Division. I've been very interested in Cedar Valley Properties business practices. Would you like to make a statement?" The color drained from his face. I should have my lawyer, and present. Probably wise," she agreed. "In fact, why don't you come down to the station this afternoon? We have quite a few questions about your company's property conversions, and bring Ms. Pierce. Her organizational skills have provided us with excellent evidence." Brandon backed toward the door. "This is all a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Detective Connor picked up one of the surveillance photos. "Because we have documented evidence of your property manager organizing criminal harassment. We have proof of permit violations across multiple properties, and now we have witnesses coming forward from other cities with similar stories." The truth about Cedar Valley Properties and Victoria's partnership unraveled faster than anyone expected. Detective Connor's investigation revealed a web of corruption that went far beyond parking disputes and zoning violations. What they uncovered was an elaborate scheme that had been operating for years. Through a series of search warrants, they discovered that Victoria wasn't just an overzealous property manager. She was a key player in Cedar Valley's entire operation. Her role in Westbrook Plaza was part of a larger pattern. She would move from property to property, using the same aggressive tactics to force neighboring businesses into submission. In return, she received substantial bonuses and a percentage of the profits from Cedar Valley's illegal conversions. The evidence was damning. Hidden in Victoria's office computer, investigators found emails detailing their strategy: target properties with vulnerable neighbors, apply pressure until they cave. If they resist, escalate until they break. My store wasn't their first victim. It was just the first one that fought back effectively. Brandon's involvement went deeper than anyone suspected. Bank records showed he had been funneling money through a series of shell companies, using it to bribe local officials and silence complaints. The relationships he had bragged about were built on payoffs and threats. Several former city employees came forward, admitting they had been paid to overlook Cedar Valley's permit violations. Brandon's involvement went deeper than anyone suspected. Bank records showed he had been funneling money through a series of shell companies, using it to bribe local officials and silence complaints. The relationships he had bragged about were built on payoffs and threats. Several former city employees came forward, admitting they had been paid to overlook Cedar Valley's permit violations. But the most shocking revelation came from Victoria's personal files. She had been keeping detailed records of everything, perhaps as insurance against Cedar Valley throwing her under the bus. These records included a comprehensive playbook for harassing neighboring businesses. Step 1. Create parking problems by overloading residential units. Step 2. Encourage residents to park illegally on neighboring properties. Step 3. When businesses complain, offer to solve the problem with below-market purchase offers. Step 4. If they refuse, escalate harassment until they sell. Step 5. Acquire property at distressed prices. Expand residential development. The documents showed they had successfully used this strategy to acquire 6 other properties in different cities. Small business owners who had lost everything started coming forward, sharing similar stories of harassment, vandalism, and economic pressure. Detective Connor called me into the station to review some of the evidence. "Your security system caught them in the act," she explained, spreading out documents across the interview room table. "But more importantly, it forced them to change their usual methods. They got sloppy, left trails we could follow." The investigation revealed that Cedar Valley had been manipulating property values throughout the city. They would deliberately create parking and infrastructure problems, wait for neighboring properties to struggle, then swoop in to buy them at reduced prices. It was a predatory real estate scheme masked as urban development. Victoria's computer contained spreadsheets, tracking their targets. Small businesses like mine, family-owned properties, anyone they thought wouldn't have the resources to fight back. Each entry included notes on potential pressure points and estimated break points where the owners would likely give up. "Look at this," Detective Connor said, pulling up a document. "They had a complete profile on you and your business, but they miscalculated badly. According to their notes, you were supposed to surrender within 30 days of sustained pressure. They didn't expect you to document everything and fight back legally. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption. Cedar Valley hadn't just broken zoning laws. They had built their entire business model around exploiting and destroying small businesses. Victoria wasn't just an aggressive property manager. She was their weapon of choice, deployed wherever. They needed to pressure property owners into selling. Most disturbing were the recordings found on Victoria's phone, conversations with Brandon where they openly discussed their tactics. "If the parking war doesn't break him," Brandon had said in one call, "we'll find something that will. Everyone has a weakness." The morning of the arrests was something I'll never forget. I was doing my usual 4:30 a.m. property inspection when 3 police cruisers rolled silently into Westbrook Plaza's parking lot, followed by unmarked vehicles carrying federal agents. Detective Connor had given me a heads up that this was coming, but seeing it unfold was surreal. They moved with practiced efficiency. One team headed straight for Victoria's apartment, another for the management office, and a third to secure evidence. By 5 a.m., Victoria Pierce was being led out in handcuffs, still wearing her silk pajamas and designer slippers. The look of shock on her face when she saw me watching from across the street was almost comical. Gone was the smug property manager who thought she could bully anyone into submission. Brandon Wells's arrest was even more dramatic. The FBI picked him up at Cedar Valley's corporate headquarters during their morning executive meeting. According to witnesses, he tried to delete files from his computer when agents entered the boardroom, but their IT team had already locked down the system. They led him out past rows of stunned employees, his perfectly tailored suit somehow looking shabby under the fluorescent lights. The charges were extensive: criminal conspiracy, organized harassment, mail and wire fraud, racketeering under RICO statutes, multiple counts of property law violations, extortion, money laundering, bribery of public officials, but the arrests were just the beginning. As news broke, more victims started coming forward. Small business owners from across the country shared similar stories of Cedar Valley's predatory tactics. My security footage became key evidence, showing their methods in action and proving the systematic nature of their operation. Richard Maxwell, their attorney, tried to cut a deal immediately. He offered to testify against Cedar Valley's top executives in exchange for immunity. His testimony revealed that the company had a dedicated acquisition through attrition department, their euphemism for the team that coordinated harassment campaigns against target properties. The investigation expanded to include city officials who had approved Cedar Valley's illegal conversions. 2 former planning commissioners were indicted for accepting bribes. A senior zoning officer was caught trying to flee the country with a briefcase full of cash and forged documents. The Westbrook Plaza residents were stunned. Many had unknowingly participated in criminal activities, thinking they were just fighting for parking rights. The FBI set up a hotline for residents who wanted to come forward with information. The stories they shared painted a picture of systematic manipulation. Victoria had carefully selected protest organizers who would follow her instructions without questioning the legality. Commissioner Martinez called me personally to share the news about the zoning board's findings. "We're revoking Cedar Valley's permits," she said. Their conversions were illegal from the start. They falsified occupancy studies, bribed inspectors, and ignored basic safety requirements. The fallout hit the real estate market hard. Cedar Valley Properties stock plummeted as investors rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. Other developers came under scrutiny as similar patterns emerged in different cities. The FBI announced a nationwide investigation into predatory real estate practices targeting small businesses. Local news crews camped outside my store, wanting interviews about the parking lot war that had exposed a criminal enterprise. I declined most requests, but I did issue one statement. This was never about parking. This was about standing up to bullies who thought they could destroy small businesses for profit. Sometimes the only way to fight corruption is to document everything and refuse to back down. The aftermath of Cedar Valley's collapse sent shockwaves through the entire real estate development industry. With their executives facing federal charges and their assets frozen, the question of what would happen to Westbrook Plaza and its residents became urgent. The property was in limbo, and 200 families were caught in the middle of a legal nightmare. That's when something unexpected happened. A coalition of local business owners, led by some familiar faces, stepped forward with a solution. Dr. Anderson, Lisa Jackson, and Tim Sr., all forced out by Cedar Valley's tactics, had formed a community development corporation. They proposed taking over Westbrook Plaza's management with a plan to restore it to its original mixed-use concept. The transition wasn't simple. The building needed extensive renovations to meet proper safety codes. The parking structure required repairs that Cedar Valley had neglected. Most importantly, they needed to rebuild trust with both residents and neighboring businesses. They asked me to join their advisory board, citing my experience in standing up to corporate bullying. Commissioner Martinez fast-tracked their permits, impressed by their commitment to following proper regulations. "This is how urban development should work," she said during the approval meeting. "Local stakeholders investing in their community, not corporate raiders exploiting it." The first changes were immediate and visible. The new management company, headed by Margaret Chen, who returned from retirement to help, began converting some of the overcrowded residential units back into professional offices. They worked with urban planning experts to develop a realistic parking solution that didn't rely on stealing spaces from neighbors. Dr. Anderson reopened his medical practice in the building, taking up the same space he'd occupied for 20 years. Lisa Jackson's law firm returned, bringing with them other professional tenants who understood the value of community. Tim's Auto Care set up a satellite location in the renovated garage, offering basic services to residents. The parking situation resolved itself naturally as units were converted and proper infrastructure was developed. The new management team implemented a smart parking system with designated spaces for residents, businesses, and visitors. They even approached me about a formal shared parking agreement for special events, this time with proper compensation and clear guidelines. Most surprisingly, many of the residents who had once participated in Victoria's harassment campaigns became some of my store's most loyal customers. Mrs. Rodriguez started a weekly cooking class in our community room, teaching residents how to make healthy meals with our fresh ingredients. The same people who had once protested outside my store were now attending these classes, sharing recipes, and building real community connections. One elderly resident, Mr. Chen, no relation to Margaret, stopped me in the produce section one day. "I was one of them," he admitted, looking ashamed. "I let Victoria convince me you were the enemy, but you were protecting more than just parking spaces. You were protecting the right way of doing business." The transformation of Westbrook Plaza became a case study in urban renewal done right. City planners from other municipalities visited to learn how proper mixed-use development could work. The project won several awards for community-focused development and became a model for other cities dealing with similar issues. The FBI used our story in their training programs, teaching agents how to recognize patterns of corporate harassment and property fraud. My security footage became part of their educational materials, showing how proper documentation could expose systematic criminal behavior. But the most significant change was in the neighborhood itself. The tension that had poisoned our community was replaced by genuine cooperation. The weekly farmers' market in our parking lot, once a source of conflict, became a community gathering point. Residents and business owners worked together on neighborhood improvement projects, proving that shared space could strengthen rather than divide a community. After the dust settled and the community began its healing process, my family and I decided it was time for a much-needed break. With Margaret Chen and the new management team keeping things running smoothly at Westbrook Plaza and Mrs. Rodriguez capably managing the store, we took our first real vacation in years, a month-long journey that would help us reconnect and recover from the stress of the past year. We chose to explore the Pacific Northwest, as far from urban development disputes as we could get. Our first stop was Olympic National Park in Washington, where ancient rainforests and rugged coastlines provided a stark contrast to the concrete jungle we'd left behind. Watching my kids marvel at thousand-year-old trees and tide pools teeming with life, I felt the tension of the past year begin to melt away. Sarah and I spent long evenings on driftwood-strewn beaches, talking about everything we'd been through. "You know," she said one night, watching the sunset over the Pacific, "when you first told me about Victoria and the parking problems, I was terrified we'd lose everything. But seeing you stand up to them, watching you fight the right way, it made me proud. You showed our kids what integrity looks like." We moved on to Oregon's Crater Lake, where the pristine blue waters and surrounding wilderness helped put our recent battles in perspective. Emma and Ethan, free from the shadow of community conflict, returned to being regular teenagers. They spent hours hiking the Rim Trail, taking photos for their social media accounts, and debating which volcanic formation looked most like their favorite video game characters. The transformation in my children was remarkable. Gone was the tension they'd carried during the Cedar Valley conflict, replaced by genuine excitement and curiosity. Emma, who had been reluctant to invite friends over during the harassment campaign, was now eagerly planning a photography club. At school, Ethan, who had grown quieter during the worst of the parking disputes, rediscovered his love of storytelling, turning our daily adventures into elaborate tales. In Mount Rainier National Park, we met a retired business owner who had faced similar corporate bullying tactics in Seattle. Over dinner at our campsite, he shared his story of standing up to developers who had tried to force him out of his family's restaurant location. "The key," he said, echoing my own experience, "is documentation and determination. They count on you giving up." The conversation helped me realize something important. Our story needed to be shared, not just as a legal case study or a warning about corporate fraud, but as an example of how communities can stand up to bullying and corruption. Sarah agreed, and we spent several evenings outlining a book that would help other small business owners protect themselves. Our final stop was the San Juan Islands, where we stayed in a small bed and breakfast run by a former urban planner. She was fascinated by our story, particularly the community's recovery process. "What you've described," she said, "is exactly how mixed-use development should work. Organic, community-driven, and respectful of existing businesses." During our last week, we took a whale-watching tour. As we watched orcapods moving through the strait, I was struck by how these magnificent creatures worked together, supporting and protecting their community. It reminded me of how our neighborhood, had ultimately come together, turning conflict into cooperation. The time away gave us all a chance to heal and reflect. We had regular family meetings, something we'd neglected during the crisis, where everyone could share their feelings about what we'd been through. The kids, especially, needed to process the experience of seeing their father targeted by organized harassment. "Dad," Emma said during one of these talks, "I used to think running a business was just about selling stuff. But you showed us it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and now when we learn about civil rights and standing up to bullies in school, I actually get it. It's not just history, it's something people still have to do." Our return to Mountain Ridge Marketplace felt like coming home to a different world. The store had thrived under Mrs. Rodriguez's management, and the community had undergone a remarkable transformation. The first thing I noticed was the new spirit of cooperation that had replaced the former hostility. Our parking lot, once a battlefield, had become a symbol of community unity. The changes were everywhere. The weekly farmers market, now a joint venture between my store and Westbrook Plaza residents, filled our lot every Sunday with local vendors, live music, and families enjoying the community atmosphere. The same residents who had once protested against us were now regular customers, greeting our staff by name and participating in store events. Margaret Chen had worked wonders with Westbrook Plaza's renovation. The building now truly lived up to its mixed-use designation, with a perfect balance of residential units and professional offices. The parking structure had been completely redesigned, with clear signage, proper lighting, and dedicated spaces for both residents and business customers. Most importantly, everything was done legally and transparently. Our story had unexpected ripple effects across the country. Small business owners facing similar situations reached out for advice, and I found myself speaking at conferences about standing up to corporate bullying. The security system we'd installed became a model for other businesses, and Marcus's security consulting firm now specialized in helping small businesses protect themselves from organized harassment. The legal aftermath brought more positive changes. Cedar Valley's executives faced lengthy prison sentences, and Victoria Pierce agreed to testify against her former employers in exchange for a reduced sentence. The FBI's investigation led to new regulations protecting small businesses from predatory development practices, with our case cited as a catalyst for change. But the most meaningful change was in our daily interactions. The morning coffee group that gathered in our cafe now included both long-time customers and Westbrook Plaza residents. They'd laugh about the parking war days, amazed at how something so toxic had transformed into something so positive. Dr. Anderson's medical practice was flourishing in its returned location, and he often joked about writing prescriptions for our organic produce. Lisa Jackson's law firm, back in its original offices, had started a pro bono program, helping small businesses understand their property rights. Tim's Auto Care had expanded its services, and his son was now running both locations successfully. Sati, kids from Westbrook Plaza, who had once posted hostile videos about our store, were now part of a youth entrepreneurship program we sponsored. They learned about business ethics, community responsibility, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Some even worked part-time at our store, gaining valuable experience and understanding of local business operations. Sarah's prediction about our story helping others came true in unexpected ways. The book we'd outlined during our vacation was published under the title Standing Your Ground, a small business owner's guide to fighting corporate bullying. It became a resource for other communities facing similar challenges, and I often received letters from readers who found courage in our experience. One evening, about a year after our return, I stood in our parking lot watching the sunset. The lot was full, Some spaces occupied by shoppers, others by residents attending a community meeting in our store's event room. The line between us and them had completely disappeared, replaced by a genuine sense of neighborhood unity. Mrs. Rodriguez joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You know what the best part is," she said, handing me one. "The new residents moving in hear about what happened and can't believe it. To them, this is just a great neighborhood where people look out for each other." She was right. What started as a fight over parking spaces had evolved into something much more significant, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, the importance of community, and the possibility of turning conflict into cooperation. As I looked at our thriving store, the renovated Westbrook Plaza, and the diverse mix of people going about their evening, I realized we'd built something far more valuable than just a successful business. We'd helped create a community where respect, integrity, and cooperation weren't just words, but daily practices. The parking lot that had once been a battlefield was now a gathering place, and the lesson was clear. Sometimes the biggest victories come not from defeating your opponents, but from transforming enemies into neighbors, conflicts into conversations, and challenges into opportunities for positive change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.